completing our climate change trilogy, a man who grew up with traditional Maori values, people looking after each other and the lands on whom their lives depended. It is his lifetime's work. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hilton Collier.
Whiti ora ki te whai au ki te ao marama. Whiti ki runga, whiti ki raro. E ngungu ki te pohatu, e ngungu ki te rākau. Tītaha ki tēnei taha, tītaha ki tērā taha, tihei mauri ora. He mihi nui ki te kingi tūheitia, whareariki, tūtonu, tūtonu, tūtonu. Waikate tani wharau, he piko he taniwha, he piko he taniwha. Kia koutou kua tai mai nei, ahu marakai Aotearoa, ka mihi, ka mihi, ka mihi. Ko hikurangi te maunga, ko waiapu te awa, ko Ngāti Parau te iwi, ko Hilton Collier ahau. Good morning everyone, and it is appropriate that I acknowledge firstly the mana whenua and the people of the Waikato, and to all of you who have come to today's conference, I acknowledge and greet you as well. So growing up on the East Coast, I had what I thought was a very normal, traditional lifestyle. We had the pā, we had people coming and going, and we thought that's how the world was. And it wasn't until 1984, when I went off to university at Lincoln College, I realised how different the lifestyle I had experienced was to the rest of the world. So it seems unusual that someone from the pastoral sector is addressing a horticultural conference, but I take some satisfaction in knowing that we currently have underway a harvest which hopefully will yield us somewhere around 50 tonne of blueberries. So I think I have some justification for being here. Obviously growing up in Mount Hikurangi, being grounded in those traditional values, it's interesting, I heard Rod Carr talking about the market will take care of things. Well, I can tell you, Rod, that in Ngāti Parau, the market would be easy to deal with. You try dealing with whānau. And I'll give you some context. In 1990, we bought back Pakidool Station. Pakidool Station is on the side of Mount Hikurangi, 3,500 hectares. The reason we bought it back was because it included Mount Hikurangi. In my pepeha, Hikurangi the mountain. It's a key part of our identity. After we bought it back, my uncles rang and said, Neff, we bought back the station. Now you run it and make money for us. And you can't do dung, 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 and a whole lot of rules. And they said, and we've got no money. So imagine that. Here we have 3,500 hectares, challenging East Coast hill country, quite a volatile place to be operating, and we have no money and a whole lot of rules that are grounded in traditional Māori tikanga. Very easy, and bearing in mind, this is in pre-settlement times, so we didn't have the big balance sheets, or the better balance sheets that we have today. So it was quite an interesting time for us. And so over the course of the next 10-15 minutes, I want to share some of that journey. I want to share some of the things that we had to deal with. It really bothers me that we talk about aspects of the taiao, the physical environment in isolation. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong in making profits. I don't think there's anything wrong in good production. So long as we are careful that the assets we pass on to our future generations are in better shape than the way we receive those assets. So, you know, you will always hear me talk about the taiao, and I totally understand greenhouse gases are quite a topical thing at the moment, but we also want biodiversity, we also want fresh water, and we operate a station at the headwaters of the Waiapu River. So let's run through this. Pakidool Farms is part of, it's the agribusiness unit owned by Ngāti Parau. We're part of a range of operating enterprises now that include a seafood business, a forestry business, health services, and also a radio station. So we're a reasonably complex organisation to operate. We operate at a number of sites on the East Coast, and as I'm sure you're all aware, you generally read about the East Coast. All the indices you might care to reel off are negative. My biggest concern is that my life ends in another 10 years when I turn 69. And yet if I lived on the other side of Gladstone Road Bridge in Gisborne, I could expect to live to 80. Aside from that though, I am firmly grounded on the East Coast. Pakidool Station is reasonably typical of much of the East Coast. On the side of Mount Hikurangi, we farm sheep and cattle, and if you run any kind of metrics over our business operation, we stand up pretty well for the class of country, 150 to 53% lambing. We carry about 9 stock units. We've done a whole lot of things that we thought were BAU for us, and that journey started way back in the early 2000s. So if you go into the station, the 3,500 hectares, we've got 2,000 hectares of indigenous forests. We've got about 230 hectares of pine trees. We've got 115 hectares of carbon farm, a dedicated carbon farm in eucalypts that are slowly transitioning back to native forest. And the main driver for us was we know we are in an area that was cleared in the last 100 years. We then learnt about erosion. We realised we had to do something to mitigate the high level of sedimentation entering our waterways and buggering up our mahinga kai. So we hooked in and made a whole lot of right land use decisions. So that's my first point. If we are going to pass on our assets to the next generation in better condition, we have to get our land use choices right. That is partly why we are now moving into horticulture as part of the mosaic of future land use options for our business, for our community, and to make sure the next generation has an easier run at life than we have. As you can see, we're not all completely hill country. We have some high performance river flats. With a bit of luck, we might be able to convert some of that finishing country into horticulture. You know, on these flats we have grown a range of crops, and not too far from this particular site we actually took out the remnants of a poorly designed kiwi fruit venture that had been abandoned before we got this part of the business back. The point is we are always looking at how do we get the best from the assets we have with the limited resources available to us. And our first problem with Pakidool is it sits between 140 and 1,100 metres. We have snow, we have virtually no topsoil. Decisions to clear that land were made 100, 150 years ago. And now that it's back in our hands, we have this hill country property. We needed to de-risk our exposure to store markets, and we have started to acquire complementary land classes to allow us to become a vertically integrated livestock business. As an interesting aside, one of the next things we're doing is looking at how we progress further along our value chain and looking at the opportunity for us to enter into meat exporting, and thanks to COVID-19, opportunities for direct-to-consumer sales channels for red meat are becoming much more normalised. But on the East Coast we have weather alerts. So Cyclone Bowler, 1988, Tolaga Bay logs 3 years ago. What was interesting about this event was it's a man-made event. Sorry, the consequences were a man-made event. We have been through 2 years of extreme droughts. These are some of the Wagyu cattle we farm, and I'll come onto that shortly. But it has been a very, very tough 2 seasons. We've had 60% of our normal rainfall. Tokomaru Bay, The drought ended with this deluge of floods that caused the Tokomaru Bay floods, also hit a number of locations. This one is particularly sensitive as my East Coast home is the site where that photo was taken from. So looking down at people in our neighbourhood being absolutely run over. What drives our business? First of all, I think we need to recognise that human endeavour impacts on all things we do, that there have to be trade-offs. We cleared the land, we had an erosion problem. We're now quickly trying to figure out how to cloth much of our hill country, but it's the right tree in the right place. Very pleased with our forestry business. 30% of our plantable area is now planted in indigenous tree species. They're in those species because our whānau who live downstream from where we operate do not want to see the sort of images of slash piling up on the beaches. We know that whenever there's a flood, we don't go and gather seafood off the East Coast because it has a very strong pine taint. So, there are always trade-offs we have to make, but decisions to put that area into native trees were made for reasons of tikanga. Certainly it hurts the cash flow, it doesn't look good when you're reporting return on assets, but it certainly makes it easier to live with the whānau. We also need to recognise our resources are finite, and we're very careful to make sure we don't deplete them unnecessarily. I have what I call the tea towel test. Whenever we go to the marae, if people in the kitchen are happy to talk to you, they give you a tea towel, which means you dry the dishes. That's the time, when they stop giving you the tea towel, you're no longer relevant to them. And so we know very quickly when we have caused them to be concerned about any of the activities we have on station. And whenever they see dirty water, whenever they see cattle in some of our intensive systems, and we have relatively intensive systems, even though we have no mud and we have certified humane standards to meet, they will tell us that we have got it wrong. Now, as I say, we still need cash. Cash is king for us. We can't sell off the assets we own, especially when they're owned within Ngāti Porou. They're bought and held forever. But we have a social agenda to deliver. So making sure we drive good cash returns is crucial, and it comes from the underlying value: look after our place, oranga whānau, the land thrives, the whānau thrives. So it's knowing there's that intimate connection. So what has been our response to the rules of the game we play? Well, firstly, trying to have the right thing in the right place. So yes, we've got livestock on a hill country property. We've also got a lot of trees planted to mitigate erosion, and more recently we're turning that into cash by being able to offer carbon credits. Tourism. Tourism is a huge and growing area of interest for us. Mount Hikurangi, the number of people who wish to go up there to experience the sunrise and some of the other cultural opportunities that exist on the station. We're fortunate to also have some very impressive carvings that represent Maui, the fishing up of Aotearoa, present on Pakidool. These things are growing money makers, so we're quite excited about that. The other things, while we're a traditional farming sheep and cattle, we don't farm ordinary sheep and cattle. We have one of the largest Wagyu herds in New Zealand. In fact, we're the single largest farming operation with Wagyu cattle as part of the First Light program, and we're looking to expand the number of cattle we have, and it comes back to a point both Lord Devon and Rod Carr made this morning. We have to get higher value from what we do. Higher value from what we do, hence we farm the Wagyu cattle. We're also doing some interesting stuff around mid-micron wool. A lot of sheep and beef farmers are moaning about the wool price being somewhere between $1.20 and $2 a kilo. So we've produced quantities of wool at $30. And the reason we've gone, and that's from crossing merino genetics over our traditional euflox. And the reason we've gone down that pathway is the board don't pay us to define the problem. The board pay us to work out what certainty we have in shifting to higher value production and making sure we navigate through some of the challenges that exist there. With our Wagyu program, it's not all plain sailing. We've learnt the hard way, you don't just have these cattle and expect to make money. So we've got, as a director of the First Light Wagyu company, we've learnt a lot more about how to improve our farming methods to achieve better outcomes. But it's quite exciting when you start to learn what it means to take a product we have on farm through a whole supply chain and get feedback. And I'm sure for many of you involved in horticulture, you're well aware of the value of that consumer feedback. The other thing I want to comment on is, while we are in an environment that suffers from extreme climatic events and lots of droughts, that doesn't mean we have to accept it. We have looked at science to provide us with solutions. So we have somewhere around 600 or 700 hectares of lucerne as a feed crop to give us certainty of production, both in terms of the energy we need to grow our livestock, but also in times of water deficiency, where we require a lot less moisture to produce a kilogram of dry matter, and we're able to reach deeper into the soil profile to extract that moisture. A couple of other things, skip through that one. Biodiversity, it's interesting to hear a lot of the commentary about biodiversity. Many of the whānau would prefer we kept our businesses in their indigenous cover. The challenge for us with that is we cannot provide for the whānau. We cannot generate the cash returns we need. So trying to work out what that balance is, trying to make sure, yes, we protect the land, we mitigate erosion, we protect our indigenous species, we improve our mahinga kai, the places we gather food from, but also we maintain a high level of biodiversity, always top of mind for us. And we're finding there is increasing interest from people wishing to participate in eco-tourism activities, and I think that will contribute to our future revenue streams. Erosion control, commented on that a couple of times already. We have a number of projects looking to reduce sedimentation. So not only are we concerned about preventing erosion, but we're also concerned that our traditional food sources, our crayfish and pawa beds, are protected. And because we operate over such a large part of the East Coast, we have a farming and we have a seafood company, there is no point the farming company achieving good production at the expense of our seafood business. So we try and bring the two together to find a nice equilibrium. I might add, we're not necessarily the most affluent of farming operations. By most benchmarks, we're certainly in the upper quartile for our class of country. Part of the trade-off we make is to make sure we leave the assets better than we started with. So I want to leave you with a challenge. Do we really need all these rules to tell us how to do the right thing? I would suggest to you that we have been doing the right thing since we took back the ownership of Pakidool Farms. I understand why the government has its current policies and position on greenhouse gases, on fresh water. It does irk me a bit that we've been doing a lot of the stuff for a long, long time, simply because it is the right thing to do. We are looking at opportunities to get higher value products, to get the recognition that comes from doing the right thing, hence our involvement with Wagyu, our involvement with a number of wool programs. We also need to maintain relatively high levels of cash flow. So we're looking at horticulture as part of the land mix of operation, land use, mosaic of land use for our operation going forward. And tourism. There's a range of opportunities out there if we want to take them. So the thought I want to leave you with is we can spend a lot of time complaining about the regulations, complaining about the rules, and they are onerous. I won't pretend they're not onerous. But in my view, this is simply about doing the right thing, about understanding that the assets we have today will be left to our grandchildren and for the generations to come after that. I'm fortunate in that I can trace back somewhere around 30 generations of connection to that part of the East Coast in which I live. And the one thing I'm totally confident in is that my children and their children will have that same connection to place. It's one of the beauty things about having inalienable assets, and that if we even suggest we do something with the station, it starts right. The challenge is to make sure the land continues to provide for the people, and we as a people remember our obligation to the land. We are connected by whakapapa. Kia ora tātou katoa.